I wonder, have you ever asked yourself, test, are we on? Yeah, okay, good. I wonder, have you ever asked yourself this question? Why did they kill Jesus? Why did they kill Jesus? I mean, by all accounts, he was a pretty good guy. If you were hungry, he had plenty of bread rolls to share with you. If you were thirsty, a little rainwater becomes the best wine. If you're sick, poof, you're healed. I mean, sometimes he liked to sneak up on people in the midst of a storm, in the fog, walking on water. That's more of a great prank than anything, if you really think about it. It's not a reason for murder. Jesus has gone down in history as one of the most kind, gentle, loving people that's ever lived, even by those who don't necessarily believe that he is the Son of God. In fact, many that I've spoken to and many people that I have read, they have said that even though they don't necessarily believe in Christianity, they certainly respect the Christ. They respect the things that Jesus taught, even if they can't necessarily get behind the religion that came from it. In a 1929 interview with the Saturday Evening Post, Albert Einstein once said, "As a child, I received instruction both in the Bible and in the Talmud. I am a Jew, but I am enthralled by the luminous figure of the Nazarene. No one can read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life." So, why did they kill this loaf-multiplying, wine-making, miracle-working Messiah? Well, they say there's three main reasons why people kill. Three. The first is financial gain, perhaps for an inheritance or robbery or promotion. The second is emotional or psychological. Perhaps it's motivated by hate or jealousy or vengeance. The third is ideological or political aspirations. We kill to advance a cause in which we deeply believe. I would like to suggest that they killed Jesus for all three reasons. And not because they were necessarily particularly bad people. I mean, they weren't great by any means. But I can guarantee you that in the minds of everyone involved, Herod Antipas, the priests, the Pharisees, the crowds, the temple guards, the Roman soldiers, they all thought that they were doing the right thing, that they were on the side of angels. And I know this because relatively good people have done terrible things in the name of God for, however long there have been people. And I know this because I know my history books, but I also know this because I know people. And I know that whether you wear a red MAGA hat or a donkey button, whether you rally for gun control or you're a card-carrying member of the NRA, whether you cheer for the Blue Jays or the evil empire known as the Yankees, we always think that we are doing the right thing, that we are on the side of angels, that we are on the side of good. And even if we sort of suspect that perhaps what we believe or what we're doing is wrong, aren't we so good at coming up with some very specific reasons why the rules of right and wrong in our particular case, in this particular situation, they simply don't apply? And I would bet my next paycheck that everyone involved in Jesus' murder believed that they were doing the Lord's work. The only one who showed any doubt at all that they were doing the right thing was none other than Pontius Pilate. In Matthew 26, we read, "What shall I do with Jesus, who's called the Messiah?" Pilate asked the crowd. They all answered, "Crucify him." "What crime has he committed?" Pilate asked. And they just shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water, he washed his hands in front of the crowd as if to say, "I clean my hands of this, I clean my hands of you." He says, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Now, this scene is kind of ironic because Pilate was a Roman governor, not even Jewish, certainly far from being a Christian, but because the Israelites were not permitted to execute anyone without the authority of Rome, they needed his permission to do so. And to prevent an uprising, he relented. You see, Jesus just wasn't worth the hassle. And at the end of the day, that's what Jesus was to those who shouted for his blood. A hassle. A hassle that had grown into a problem, and a problem which had grown into a threat. You see, Jesus was born, as we discussed last week, he was born into a place and a time of clashing empires. We remember, and we know this from the Christmas story, that his birth was heralded by a shining star and magi who came from the east bearing gifts. He was born King of the Jews, and we remember from last week that King Herod would never forget that the baby king had what? Slipped through his fingers. Now, Jesus was not even able to shave by the time that King Herod had died. And when Herod died, they split his empire into 4, and they divided it among some of his children. Each of his children that inherited a slice of the pie was given the title of tetrarch from the number 4, and they were given a region over which to rule. The tetrarch in charge of the area in which Jesus lived was called Herod Antipas. He was Herod Jr., in other words. So you hear a lot about Herod Antipas at the end of the Gospels. And there was one thing that Herod Antipas asked of Pontius Pilate and the Jewish leaders. There's one thing that he asked for, and that was to maintain the status quo. Keep people working. Keep people farming. Keep people having babies. Keep the tax money flowing through the temple and into the coffers of Rome. Or else. After all, conquering 2 million square miles stretching from Britain to Egypt was not cheap. And this put the religious leaders, the priesthood, the Sadducees, all in an uncomfortable position. Because on the one hand, they yearned to be a sovereign nation once again, with their own monarchy, with their own religious freedom. They wanted to get back to the glory days of David and Solomon, where they were an empire to be respected, even feared. But on the other hand, they really like money. Because for those who supported their way of life, Rome was happy to keep tables full and pockets lined. But those who did not support the empire, they suddenly found themselves out of a job, or worse. One day, this young so-called teacher from this itty-bitty town called Nazareth started calling some disciples, some followers unto himself. He had no training. He never went to rabbinical school. He wasn't a priest or a Sadducee. He was just some guy from an obscure place who was proclaimed King of the Jews 30 years previous, and nobody had really heard from since. So, you would think that his time in the spotlight would be short-lived. And you'd be right in one way, and you'd be wrong in another. You'd be right in that his time in the spotlight, it really only lasted 3 years. But you would be wrong because in those 3 years, he changed the entire course of human history. In fact, millions still gather every Sunday, like we are right now, to share the things which Jesus taught. So what did he teach? What did he teach? Well, it wasn't actually all that radical. He said a lot of stuff that I think most of us here would agree with in principle, although perhaps it's harder to live out in reality. What he said, though, was a spark. It was a spark that, if fanned into flame, could ignite a rebellion. And here's what he said. If you'd like to follow along in your Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 5. Here's what he said. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." You know, it's important for us to note that Jesus, he didn't minister to the 1% in the city. He didn't go down to Jerusalem and debate, for the most part, with those who were in power. He already understood their position all too well. Everybody did. Instead, he preached in the small towns and the out-of-way places. He preached to the poor, because that's what most people were. He preached to the sick. Poverty and illness often go hand in hand. He preached to those who were well acquainted with suffering and with loss. He says, "The meek shall inherit the earth." Now, meek is a word that we don't use a lot these days. The Greek word can also be translated humble or gentle, but I think maybe the best way to put it is, blessed are the unimportant, for they will inherit the earth. Because those are the people to whom Jesus preached. Those who in the world's eyes were unimportant. But in God's eyes, well, they were everything. God's plan, then, if we're paying attention, is to wrest the world from the grip of those in power. And he calls this plan the kingdom of heaven. You see, this kingdom would not come by force. He goes on to say, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." Just imagine a group of powerless nobodies ruling the world through generosity, forgiveness, and justice. This is a Jesus-style rebellion, where the focus is not on power, but on doing what is right. That word righteousness, it means to do right by God and to do right by others. It's been transformed into a word that perhaps means something entirely different, maybe not even always positive, but that's all it really means, to walk in right relationship with others and with God. That's what it means. So Jesus is initiating a rebellion where the focus is not on power, but on doing what is right. Not on control, but on mercy. And then he says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." Well, I don't know if you've ever read these passages in the Bible where people like Moses, for example, other great prophets, they just dared not look upon the face of God, like in Exodus 3. Moses says, no, Lord, if I saw you, that would be the end of me. In my impurity, I couldn't look upon your holiness. I just couldn't do it. It would overwhelm me. So this here raises a big question. To join this Jesus movement, do I need to be so pure that I could look upon the face of God when even Moses himself dared not to? Well, none of us are pure. We know that. We also know Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned, fall short of the glory of God. But what I think that Jesus is driving at is that the powerful are so blinded by their allegiance to empire, whether it's the empire of the temple, the empire of Rome, their own personal empire that they are attempting to build, that they cannot see God. But blessed are those who behold the face of Jesus and know that God has come to lead them where the priesthood never could, into the actual presence of God. You might remember in the temple was the holiest of holies, where they said the presence of God actually dwelled. And people would make a journey at great cost every year, if they could, to go to Jerusalem, to stand in the outer courts of the temple, nowhere even near the inner sanctuary or inside the temple, just in the inner courts, and just to be that close, the presence of God. And only one person was allowed in there once a year to do a little dusting, and they would tie a rope around his ankle in case he was judged unworthy. Blessed are the pure in heart, Jesus says, for they will see God. Not get close, not get near. They will see God. They will see God in the face of Jesus. And all this is wonderful. It sounds pretty good. And it is a radical calling. But it won't be easy. Jesus will spell out for them and for us just how radical this calling is. He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." The identifying marker of the people of this movement will be that they are peacemakers. That's how you will know them. The fact of the matter is that this new world that Jesus is beginning is not going to happen all by itself. It begins in the heart with an experience of Christ, but it's expressed outwardly by humble people who are willing to forgive their enemies and to enter into the conflict of others, and urging and helping creative ways towards peace. Jesus doesn't just call us to envision a world where Jesus calls us to envision a world where people don't build empires, they build communities shaped by service and generosity and love. But this is not an easy path. If you try to live this out, every single established authority will resist such a kingdom with all of its considerable might. So Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Entering into the conflict of others, urging and helping create ways towards peace, this is not a comfortable way to live. So when Jesus invites us into this peacemaking rebellion, he names the high cost. There will be pushback. There will be persecution. But he continues, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." What does that mean, the prophets before you? Well, Jesus and this whole crowd, they're all Israelites. And in their scriptures, God promised that it would be through Israel that God's kingdom would be restored over the whole world. But as the story goes, Israel would become as corrupt and as violent as everybody else. And they ended up enslaved to other nations. But Israel's prophets, they stood up against the empires and they criticized their corruption. They said that one day God's heavenly kingdom would break in. And it would break in starting with a small group of Israelites who were willing to surrender everything over to God. And Jesus wants this crowd to see that they are in fact part of this legacy. And that's why Jesus concludes the opening part of his sermon with 3 images from his scriptures. He said, "You are the salt of the earth." I'm sure you're familiar with that passage. Salt is a mineral. It preserves food for a very long time. But in the Bible, salt is used as a symbol of God's long-lasting covenant with Israel. Jesus was saying that he and this group of nobodies are in fact the launch party of God's long-lasting promises to renew the entire world. And then he says, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden." Well, here he's referencing the biblical image of God's light, his presence shining out from the temple in Jerusalem, which was a city on a hill. It could be seen from all around, from everywhere. But these people that Jesus is talking about, they're not rulers. They're not people of power. They don't even live near Jerusalem. But surprise, he says, you are all God's salt and city and light. You are the blessed ones, the new Jerusalem that is going to display God's kingdom of peace to all the world. And it was this teaching that got Jesus killed. And when Pilate asked, "What crime has this man committed?" you notice they didn't answer because they knew the answer. The answer was none. They simply shouted, "Crucify him," all the louder. Because a message like this is far too dangerous to be allowed to spread. You see, if we actually lived this way, if we actually shared what we had with all, if we actually loved our enemy, if we actually stood together as the 99%, it would spell the end of the 1% who had 3 reasons to silence this movement. It would cost them money, it attacked their reputation, and it threatened their way of life. And that is when the empire decided to strike back. Now, John gives us an insight into what happened after he raised Lazarus from the dead. Remember that big story? The news of raising Lazarus from the dead was kind of hard to keep quiet. And so after that happened, the chief priests, the Pharisees, called a meeting of the Sanhedrin, the powerful religious leaders in the temple. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up, "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." And he was so right. The passage concludes, from that day on, they plotted to take his life. This leads me to ask another question. Are the 1% afraid of us today? Does the message that we preach on Sunday in our churches threaten the establishment at all? Are they shaking in their boots? Because from what I see, they are not. And I have to ask myself, why? Next week, we're going to explore how the empire's plan to squash the rebellion ultimately backfired, and instead of stamping out a small fire, they actually fanned the flames into a roaring inferno. But for now, I'd like to invite the music team to come forward to lead us in singing, "Were You There?" as we reflect upon how when we take the words of Jesus seriously, it will always, always lead to a cross.